Welcome to technical session number 10, where we will be talking about drives. Can everybody see my screen here? S10 drives? Yes, no?
Yes.
All right, good. Excellent. So, drives, we're going to be talking about our non-volatile memory. So we're going to be talking about the purposes, types, and characteristics of storage devices. We're going to be comparing and contrast various connection interfaces for drives. So we're going to be kind of continuing that conversation on connectors. We don't want to give you all the connectors at one time because that can be a little bit obnoxious and highly confusing. So we throw a little bit more in here. We'll throw a little bit more networking just to kind of build upon your connector knowledge as we go. We're going to be talking about RAID, not the bug spray, but the storage medium. For all of those who are excited and wanting to get into this is one of those subjects that everybody just absolutely loves. They get it on the first try, and it makes complete sense right out of the gate. And next, after that, we're going to be describing the process for installing devices. It's very similar to what we've done before in the past, so that we'll move through pretty quickly. And finally, identify some common hardware problems and how to solve them. And hopefully that solution isn't my condolences on your loss. But we will be talking about a few of these as we go. Behavior skills and mindsets, we're going to focus on for the duration of this technical session: customer focus and growth mindset. So we have to understand. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Kelly. I'm sorry, but on the Nearpod, we was usually able to direct the slides ourselves. Is it an option, or you have it like that today?
Well, no, there's the student paced ones, which are in Slack, which you can guide yourself. There's the link that I put in the chat, which is instructor guided.
Yep, that's true. That's true. Thank you. All right.
No worries. All right, so customer focus. Without our customers, we don't have a job. We have to make sure we take care of our customers, and even if we're unable to resolve the issue, at least we will have tried to help them in any way we can, and we've given it every effort we can, and they understand that. And if you have good customer service skills, even if you are not able to complete it to the fullest extent that they would wish, like if there was a total loss of a hard drive, they still will have a pretty good customer experience and will want to return. And finally, growth mindset. We're all here because we believe we can learn new things, and we want to continue along that path. Essentially, what are drives? It's a mechanism to store data. You can record to it, hold it, or process information. And any device that only holds information is a recording medium, such as like DVDs, CDs, prior to the rewriting. Devices that process information are data storage equipment. And some of the most common ones, not now, optical drives, but at the time of this, optical drives are some of the most common, but now you typically have flash drives and hard drives. Any Laserdisc fans out there still using that? No, nobody? Their size of a record, pretty big, Who didn't want to pay $80 for a movie? Come on. All right. So drives fall into essentially 5 camps. You have your optical drives, which encompasses your CD, DVD, Blu-ray. Optical because we're using a laser to read and write the information. You have your HDDs or hard disk drives. These are your mechanical hard drives with a magnetic read-write head, lots of moving parts in it. They use platters and other parts within it, which we will go over the internal components of a hard drive, because we do need to know that. Also, we talk about solid state drives. This also gets into the flash drives and stuff like that. And they call those also SDDs. There's no mechanical parts. Data is stored on blocks, much like a flash drive. And then there are hybrid drives, because flash memory is still pretty expensive when compared to hard disk drives, mechanical drives. So they do make drives that are a combination of both in a single package, and those are called hybrid drives. And then finally, you have the extremely old school, but still used tape drives. Did you ever watch any of those spy movies from the 80s, and they had the server rooms with like the reel-to-reels moving. Those are tape drives. They're absolutely amazing for archiving information, for long-term storage, because it's really good at maintaining data integrity over time. But we'll talk a little bit more about them as we go through here. First, optical drives. So we have our CD, DVD, Blu-ray, and their capacities. CDs, typically around 700 megabytes. You're sitting there thinking, do I have to know this stuff? Do I have to memorize this stuff? Is this really important to my existence? With regards to the exam, yes, it is. So I would take a screenshot of this particular slide. And my recommendation to you is to notate the highs and like the lower and upper limits. So CDs around 700 megabytes, DVDs 4.7 to 17.1, Blu-rays 25 to 100. Do you need to know the transfer rates? No, you do not. But capacities you do need to be aware of, as well as how they store data. Original DVDs were single layer, single-sided. And then they got a little fancy and it was double layer, single side, or excuse me, double side, single layer. Then they had single side, double layer, and now we have double side, double layer. And they did this for both DVDs, and then Blu-rays, they skipped the single side or single layer, double side, and they just jumped to the double side, double layer. And they use different colored lasers in order to be able to hit those depths. So just have an idea. DVDs around 4.7 to 17.1, Blu-ray 25 to 100. I think 4K, we're getting even higher. And then your CDs around 700 megs. Questions? All right. The anatomy of a hard drive. Do you need to know this? Yes, yes, you do. So on the drive, you have the data is stored on this big round piece right here. It's called a platter, much like a plate or a serving platter you would use to serve up food or whatnot at a restaurant. The platter is where the data is stored on the actual mechanical drive. It rotates on the spindle, which is the centerpiece of that round platter. And then we get over to where how the data actually gets on and off. You have a read-write head, which is the tip of this triangular arm that points in. It has a little magnetic read-write head on there, and it will add information to the drive or remove it or read information from the drive. That is attached to the actuator arm, which is the arm that points out to where the head is. And that pivots on the axis, which is the actuator axis. A lot of the stuff is just similarly named. So the axis is where it pivots, and the motor that drives it is the actuator itself. And this is the motor that drives the arm back and forth to be able to write and read from the drive. On the back of it, you have an IDE connector or a SATA connector, depending. And then you have your 4-pin Molex power connector or your SATA power over here. And then in the middle, you have a jumper block where you can determine what type of drive this is. You can set it as, depending on the literature you're reading, as either a master-slave situation or primary-secondary. Depending on what books you're reading, they still may be referred to in these terms. Or drive 0, drive 1 is another way they may refer to them. So depending on how old the literature you're reading is how they will refer to the types of drives. All right, data is stored sequentially in tracks, which these tracks are like the lines that go around the drive itself. And each data block is called a sector. Later on, we'll get into defragmentation and why you have to do that and what causes that. Because when you initially write to the drive, it puts everything in order. But the problem is as you delete and rewrite, it has to write things scattered over the drives rather than in a contiguous block in one section. So we use the process of defragmentation to put everything that is supposed to be together, speeding up our ability to read and write from the drives. All right.
Can I just mention something?
Absolutely.
On the previous slide, a good way to remember, the actuator arm, and the actuator axis. I call that the AAA. So I can remember. So I can remember the different parts. So
Okay.
if you remember AAA,
Arm, access, and then the
actuator itself.
Okay, I like that. AAA. All right. Start out strong here. DeWitt, can you please tell me what's the big round thing here?
It is a platter.
That absolutely is the platter. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Christian, what's this little piece in the middle? If you're talking, your microphone is off.
Maybe it helps if I put it down.
Sorry, what was that?
No, I said maybe I should just put my mic down and it'll work actually. Which one were you pointing at?
I'll put my headphones on.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you just a little bit low.
Yeah, I'm not best in hearing as it is.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I got headphones on.
Oh,
I'm good
okay.
now.
Which were we pointing at?
Center of this giant platter, what do we call that?
Is it the axis?
It's the thing it spins on.
Axis or no?
Not the axis, not the axis. You want to phone a friend? Or you want to give it another shot?
Spindle.
Pass.
Who was the voice in the wilderness?
Someone said something. I don't know who it was.
Sounded like Donnie.
It's the spindle.
There we go. Spindle. There we go. Excellent. Spindle. All right. Lincoln. Very tip, this long piece right here. What is the very tip here called? I'm not expecting perfection. We just went over this.
Is it the arm?
It's not the arm, it's the tip right here.
Is it the acuter?
No, not quite. I mean, we're getting close on the connections here. Getting close on the connections. We're knocking on the right doors here. Babakar.
That's the head.
The head, what does it do?
So it's the one that read on the actual disk.
There you go. It reads and writes. So it's the read-write head. So the very tip of the arm, that is what reads and writes information to and from the platter. Enrique, can you tell me this long thing that's connected to that read-write head? What do we call that?
The axis?
Not the axis. The arm. What arm?
Actuator arm.
Actuator arm. Perfect. Thank you. Actuator arm. Stacy, what is that actuator arm connected to? That pivot point.
The axis.
There we go. The actuator axis. Excellent. And Cynthia, what's this little curved piece behind the actuator axis?
Can I ask help from Adriel? Is that allowed?
Can you try to guess first and then we can ask for help? We gotta get a little comfortable getting things wrong. We're not gonna scream at you, I promise. So it's the actuator arm connected to the actuator axis, which is connected to this motor that drives it. What would we call that motor?
I'm stuck.
You're stuck? Okay.
You're not stuck. Got this.
Adriel, can you rescue me? I'm stuck.
The
I
clue
only
is
got one arm.
it has the name, like
Does
the
the act-
name of it. It's on the name
Yeah,
of the other
it's
two we just
name.
mentioned.
is
So
The other two
actuator, right?
components. Yep.
We just mentioned actuator axis, actuator
Arm.
arm.
Um,
So what's the there's one more that's part of the AAA.
the actuator.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep.
The actuator itself. So the actuator is the motor that causes it to move back and forth. The axis is the pivot point, and then the arm is the piece that moves the read-write head around. Now, for the purposes of the exam, there's one more piece that is not labeled on here, which is this little set of wires that run from the actuator arm to essentially where would be the connector, the data connection on the back. And that is called the data ribbon. It's flat like a ribbon. That's the only thing that is not listed on the anatomy, so to speak, that you would be asked about.
Say one more time for me, Kelly, please.
Sure. It's this little bundle of wires right here that go from, connects the actuator arm to the outside of the hard drive, which connects to where your data cables go. And that is your data ribbon. Data ribbon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yes, Amaya.
On the platter, which part is the cylinder?
The platter, that is the
Yeah.
big round piece where all the data is written right there.
Yes. Then where is the cylinder?
Cylinder would be multiple platters stacked on top of each other.
Okay.
So great question. Yeah, a cylinder would be multiple platters stacked on top of each other, and then you would call that a cylinder. Or a column or whatever. Madison.
On the previous slide, it mentions that there's two heads that service the platter, but I only see one. Is it underneath by chance?
Well,
something?
what it is sometimes is you have, if you have two platters together or they right on either side of the platter, you may have two heads. I can't do this with one hand. Two heads attached like this, and then they're moving back and forth together. So it would actually be one on top of the other. So one would be above the platter, one would be under the platter. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mhm. But excellent question. All right, so talked about the anatomy of a hard drive. Next, HDD rotation speeds. I know y'all are instantly honing in because you see a lot of data down at the bottom. You're like, do I need to memorize this? Is this important? Is this critical? No. You mostly need to have an idea. The faster the RPMs, the faster the information can be written and read from the drive. So slower the RPMs, the slower the data is going to flow. The faster the RPMs, the faster the data is going to flow. That's the basic takeaway from this slide. And it is calculated in RPMs or revolutions per minute. Now we move on to our third of the 5 families, solid state drives. They have, as we had mentioned before, no moving parts. This is non-volatile memory chips, which means what? What does non-volatile mean?
The data stays when the system loses power.
When the power is cut off, the data remains. What would be the opposite of this? What would be an example of the opposite of this?
Volatile.
Which is, what's an example of volatile memory?
RAM.
RAM. Perfect. Thank you. So volatile loses its memory when the power is turned off. Non-volatile maintains that data when the power is turned off. So solid state drives, volatile, non-volatile memory. Yeah, I'll get it right eventually. Non-volatile memory holds on to that information for you. It has, it's less susceptible to physical shock. If you drop a mechanical hard drive, bad things can happen. But if you drop a solid state drive within reason, I would throw it off a building. It usually can sustain shock pretty well. Also, added bonus, it has a much lower access time rate. Like, so there's less latency, less delay when you're looking for information. So if you have like hybrid drives where you have some solid state ones and some mechanical ones, you put the stuff that you need the fastest access to, like if you're playing games or something like that, you want that on a solid state rather than a mechanical drive. Things that would be slow access or time is not a factor, spreadsheets, Word documents, things like that, you put that on a mechanical drive if you're operating on both. So you would set up your memory so that it operates with it. You put your operating system on the solid state. And then things that just access wasn't critical, put that over in your mechanical drive. Per gigabyte, it is more expensive than a mechanical drive. Granted, the cost of solid state drives have come down drastically over, say, the last 10 years or so. Used to be really expensive, but now you can pick up like a 1 terabyte drive for, you know, $20, $30 if you look. And that was like unheard of 10 years ago or so.
Drop the link.
You would be like $300-400 for a single terabyte. So you would have to balance that need versus cost with regards to whether or not you would get a mechanical drive or a solid state drive. So, all right, here we go. Now, within the family of solid state, you have subfamilies. So you have your flash drives, which go by thumb drives, jump drives, travel drives, flash drives, all basically different names for the same thing. You know, it's kind of like, say, soda in the South, say pop in the North, you know, it's the same thing, just call it something else. These are hot swappable devices. I throw a caveat in there on that. What does hot swappable mean?
You can remove them while the computer is still on.
Yeah.
Okay. What does cold swappable mean?
You can remove them while the computer is off.
So you have to turn the computer off to be able to swap it out, right? Okay, so that's cold swappable. What's warm swappable?
You have to remove them and restart the computer.
Nope, you don't have to remove it.
Like you could do it cold and hot? Because cold and hot equals.
Can't do it cold and hot, but you have to think about some of the earlier days of USBs. Francis has it in chat. Adriel, what are your thoughts?
I never did this, by the way. I would rip my USB stick
Yep.
out of the computer. Never even knew you had to eject it. Nothing bad ever happened, but you should.
Like a floppy disk, like.
It's kind of like that, yeah, but it's usually for USB, like thumbs.
Yeah, it's
thumb
usually
drives.
meant when we're speaking specifically about USBs, you have to actually go in and take an action to eject it. You can't just rip it out. Early flash drives, if you did that, you could destroy all the information that was on it, no problem. It still can happen, but it's very rare. And you may get that warning like it was ejected unexpectedly or something like that. But that is technically considered warm swappable.
Hey, just real quick, Kelly, can I get just a definition on warm swappable, just like the word, like what the word, so I can write it down?
Yeah, warm swappable can be changed without shutting the computer down, but requires direct action to eject it. So you have to go in and intervene and say eject so that it can stop its processes, and then you can pull it out.
Thank you.
Stephen.
So now that I know that now, so it's called warm swappable. So basically, I have an external hard drive, and then before obviously ejecting it, I have to literally go into my computer and put eject before I remove it, because that would probably mess up some information or corrupt something. That is technically a warm swap.
Warm swappable, technically.
Good to know.
yes.
Good to know. Got you. All right.
They give some examples of hot swappable down here. I have a very big problem with one of these. I'm wondering if anybody out there can figure out which of those three I have a problem with and why. So it says USB, FireWire, and SATA. Which one of those would I have a problem with being hot swappable and why? Ninja.
Say,
I want to say I want to say SATA.
You're correct. That one I do have a problem with them calling it hot swappable. Why do I have a problem with it?
Because SATA has power power connection. Is that
Well, where's SATA located?
It's internal, no?
internal?
It's internal. Do we
connected
ever
to
reach
hard
inside a
drive.
computer when it's on?
No.
No. So I would argue against it being hot swappable. For the purposes of the exam, they call it that. The technology allows for that. But my response is generally, for safety precautions, they say you never reach inside a computer when it's on. So technically, it would have to be off before you could actually do something. So that's my personal argument against that. Yes, Adriel.
What about eSATA disks?
Yeah,
They
but that's
use
not SATA, is it? That's eSATA. That's external SATA. That's a totally different thing. It's a similar technology, yes, but it's specifically built to be external. They're not distinguishing that here. They're just saying SATA.
I'm
I
not gonna
think
lie,
we
I
should
now
just
wanna
take
do
that
it.
out. That's
Yeah, I want to.
That's
I want to do
dumb.
that now. I want to open my computer and take out the drive. And see what happens.
So for the
Yeah.
purposes of the exam, they consider SATA a hot swappable technology.
Oh
I again argue because it's internal in the computer and we don't reach inside. eSATA, different animal. So, but that's just a nuanced argument from myself. Yes, Babukar.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna ask exactly what Adriel just said, because with the SATA you can still use the connectors and connect it while it's outside, and you can pull it out like a hot swap without
Yeah, but that
reaching
would
the
be
computer.
that would be an eSATA though.
You said okay, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be a different, technically considered a different type.
What if you have an extension cable from the SATA ports on the motherboard and it comes outside of the case?
Yep,
I don't think you can do extension cables. I think SATA cables have like I think they have a maximum
limit?
length of like 13 inches or something like that. They're not very long.
Nah,
You still gotta
we're
connect
gonna
the
figure
power
it out.
too, so.
Yeah,
And the power, there you
has
go.
to be there. So I'm saying
Yep.
like maybe if you but what if you have your like operating system on it and you unplug it and then your whole computer just turns.
Yeah, there you go. See, there we
Never
go.
mind,
Another
never mind,
reason.
never mind. There's no reason for this.
All right. So, but basic premise, you get what we're saying. These are thumb drives. These are, they tend to have smaller amounts of storage than a standard hard drive. Technically, these are considered hot swappable drives for the thumb drives. But we now know the nuance of warm swappable to make it a little bit more, make a little bit more sense. The next subfamily we talk about is compact flash, which there is like the type 1, which is roughly about 3 millimeters thick. And then you have the type 2, which is around 5 millimeters thick. Do you need to know that? No, you do not. It's used directly in a PC card slot. And then you have the ATA or IDE, which is the PATA, which is that big flat ribbon, and the PCM-CIA, which is a passive adapter reader that's on the side of some laptops. They pretty much have weeded most of these out, but you used to be able to add functionality like a modem. You could add, like a NIC that way. You could add Wi-Fi. You could add a USB port. You could do added memory. And it's these little cards. We have a picture of them here in about a slide or two so you can see what they are. And that's the PCM-CIA, which is a compact flash. And then you have the SD cards. For those of you in the Android family, you know what these are. We have the little micro SDs that you stick in the side of your phone, and it gives you a bunch of extra memory to have on it. So this is also a type of flash. Historically speaking, it was more used in cameras and stuff like that, but now we use them for a much bigger variety of stuff. Max capacity, roughly about 512 gigabytes, and they have a variety of form factors, which we have a picture for coming up. Other ones we get into, SSD or solid state drives. Underneath the solid drives, these are the drives you would use internally in your computer. They have 3 form factors at this time, although for the 1101, they've dropped the 1.8 and they just focus strictly on the 2.5 or 3.5. And it says rarely the M.2. M.2s are becoming significantly more popular because of the access speeds and the smaller amount of real estate that they take up. So M.2s are becoming significantly more popular. Costs are coming down when they're becoming more reasonable. And we'll show you what an M.2 looks like here in a little bit. It looks almost like a RAM module, except the connectors are on the side of it, like the smaller edge of the rectangle, rather than the long edge. Why do we have 2.5 and 3.5? In your standard desktop, drive bays are roughly 3.5 inch. So either your 3.5 strictly go in standard PCs like towers or mini towers, something like that. Laptops, real estate is premium, so we need a smaller drive. You put the 2.5s in laptops. You can put the 2.5 in a tower. All you need is a physical adapter. It's a little plastic piece that you snap it into that allows you to slide it into the 3.5 bay. Max capacity, roughly about 16 terabytes as of 2015. They're trying to build upon this. Host interfaces are typically SATA, PCI Express, or the SCSI connectors. So that is the typical one. And then you have your M.2, which will interface directly in a PCI slot that folds down onto the motherboard itself. And then finally, eMMC, which stands for Embedded Multimedia Controller. It's a little bit slower than the solid state, but it's also cheaper, thankfully. And this is typically used in smartphones or tablets. Again, as of like around 2016, 2018, they're moving a little bit more towards M.2s to give them much more robust memory, but they also are more expensive. It's embedded into the board rather than being an add-on. And again, this technology is kind of moving away a little bit as we're moving into the need for much higher storage and faster response times. Questions so far on this?
Can you believe?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What they initially wanted to call SCSI.
Hey,
I
it's
can't
IT people.
believe.
It's IT
I cannot
people.
believe that.
What do you do?
What were they trying
Yeah.
to call it?
Well,
Madison put it in the chat.
yeah, originally they were going for sexy, SCSI, sexy, but but unfortunately, as meme culture is what it is, SCSI caught on much faster.
What's the what does EMCC what does eMMC stand for again?
Embedded Multimedia Controller. All right, Adriel.
I was gonna ask about the hard drives. You have the SATA cable connector, and then the power, and then IDE. So it can be connected either way, or is that something that's kind of lost traction, or you can still?
Well, what it is like, as the technology is evolving, a lot of times they'll have that bridging connection, so like they'll have the new connection and they'll have the older connection, which allows them to not continue to manufacture the old ones. They can start moving away from it. And then over time, people use that older connection less and less and less as the newer computers are getting manufactured. So it allows you to weed out that technology over time. It's kind of like the VGA cables, like the old blue ones on the back of monitors. For the longest time, you would see the blue ones and the white ones. You had VGA and DVI because they were trying to move away from the VGA, that analog, and get more into the digital video. And the nice thing was, is over time, it actually made it easy for you to do dual monitor rigs. You could put one in the VGA and one in the DVI, and the system could understand that. But now we've got other options that are going. VGAs are dropping off, and even now the DVIs are starting to drop off. And it's just basically it's display port, USB, or HDMI. So as the technologies evolve, you hold on to those older technologies just for a little while, a couple of years, to allow for a easier transition.
Okay.
Because if you do a hard stop on the technology, people who are like late adopters aren't going to even want to buy your product until much later and their product starts to fail. Right? Which is why Blu-rays were backwards compatible with DVD. If it wasn't, people were like, I'm not going to rebuy all of my movies. You know, why would I do that? I would just keep, you know, a DVD player. But Blu-ray makes it backwards compatible, makes it easier to transition. Yes, Babacar.
Oh, is the M.2 drive the same as the eMMC?
No, they're not. M.2s fall more into your SSDs. They are, see, eMMCs are slower. And those are embedded chips. So those are like soldered onto the board. Can't be changed out. M.2s have they use like a PCI connection essentially to link directly down to the motherboard, and it allows for an extremely fast connection. So M.2s are very fast.
They're fast, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. Thank you.
And that falls under the SSD. One day when I grow up, I'll have an M.2 as well. Brianna.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, is SCSI part of the hard drive, or was that something else?
SCSI is not part of the hard drive. It is a type of connector for the drive. So it's like a plug.
Oh, okay. And the acronym is
SCSI right here. So SCSI, pronounced SCSI.
Oh, that doesn't look like it's pronounced that way. Thank you for clarifying.
So no problem. So SCSI. All right. Moving through. Here are some examples of form factors of SSD or for compact flash and SD cards or secure digital. Many of these are familiar. Micro SD for you Android users. You have your micro M2, but you don't see that often. The old camera ones, like so if you use your GoPros, you usually use a camera, one like this, or your micro SDs, depending. For those of you early adopters into the SDLR cameras, you'll remember the big compact flash ones right here, much thicker, wider, didn't have a whole ton of memory space on them, but it was awesome not to have to deal with film and take a bunch of shots and send it off for a week and hope that good pictures came out of it. But different form factors, which again, what does form factor mean? What's that a fancy way of saying?
Different shape.
Size and shape.
Size and shape. Excellent. All right, here's a example of some external readers. Some computers actually had these built into them, where you actually had the SD readers, the compact flash readers, all that stuff on the front of the computers. Does anybody ever work on a computer that actually had these? In my old office, I actually had one. I had a Dell that had the card readers on the front. Yeah, they did make things convenient if you are a photographer. It was really nice. But yeah, this is basically just what an external card reader would look like. All right. So an SSD drive, this is kind of what they look like when here's one with the cover on. This is typically what you will see. If you peel back the cover, this is kind of what it looks like internally. Well, here's one that would go into your PCI slot. As you can see, your connectors right here on the side. And then an internal drive, if you took it off, you would just see a series of memory chips installed on the board itself. And then right here, this is what I was talking about earlier. This is an M.2. So the connectors on the side, it looks almost like a RAM module, but you would plug it down into the motherboard directly here, and then it would lay down flat. And then this little notch up here, you would actually put a screw in to hold the M.2 down onto the motherboard itself. But this right here is the way things are starting to move. Just because it allows it to be much more compact, it's securely hooked up. Your data speeds are extremely high, and the costs are starting to come down on them. Did you have a question, Ramon?
I was gonna ask, like, can RAMs lay down like that? But then I thought about like the space, and so yeah, never mind.
In all-in-ones and laptops, they do. So you install them into a hinge and then they lay down. So yes, you're absolutely correct. They do that. So yeah, because we can't have the flat motherboard and then a RAM module just sticking out at 90 degrees on a laptop. It would, the laptops would be this thick. And, though they were at one time, thankfully, many of us have repressed those memories and are now liking the very, very thin and, laptops that don't weigh 45 pounds, so kind of moving in that direction. Yes, George.
The M.2, it's like an NVMe, right? But I think the only thing different is the connectors, right? Or am I wrong? Like the connector ports, because they look the same to me, NVMe and M.2.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the connection may be similar, but no, I don't think they're the same.
They're not the same? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. All right. All right. We have finished our conversation with SSDs. We move on to hybrid drives. This one is very simple, singular slide. What it is, it's a combination of mechanical and solid state in a single package. Gives you the best of both worlds. You can have your solid state for your most critical things that you need fast reaction time to. And then you could get the added extra space of the mechanical drive along with it. So, as the name suggests, it is a combination or middle ground of the two. You don't really see these a lot nowadays. People tend to go one way or the other. But in the earlier days of solid state drives, where the cost differential was much higher for a solid state, these made economical sense.
So these are cheaper than getting a normal SSD?
Of the same size, yes.
Yeah.
It would be, but now the cost is like, it's kind of nominal, it's like you may save like $5, $10 versus when the SSD drives were still coming up, it might be $20, $30 a drive, which if you're buying 1,000 hard drives, that adds up really quick, right?
Yeah, might as well just get a regular SSD, right?
Yeah, at this point, the cost differential is so nominal, you just might as well go with the SSD, unless you're using massive amounts of storage, in which case you might even consider a RAID array. I see the excitement in your eyes. You guys can't
No
wait
idea
till
what that is.
That's oh
Yo.
my god. You are something else. What a nice caveat to like.
This is the
Kelly.
level of excitement. Yes.
Sorry.
Who's speaking?
This is Altay.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. So the hybrid hard drive is the only special thing about it is what? It's super fast and.
Well, no, it's not that it's super fast. It is both a solid state. It's both a solid state and a mechanical drive in one package. So you can put your critical stuff that needs fast access on the solid state portion.
Yes.
The stuff that it doesn't matter, it can be slower on your mechanical section.
Yes, that's true. Thank you.
No problem. It's kind of like a hybrid electric. It has gas functionality and it has electric functionality. So it's just that middle ground. All right. The all important and critical tape drive. And possibly if you do a Kahoot later, it also is known as a tap drive. Something that happened at 3 a.m. when you're really tired in a TA trying to create Kahoots. So you may see a tap drive, and that is also known as a tape drive. All right, so tape backup devices, as we saw it, sometimes it looks like a reel-to-reel. They do have them in their own contained packages, almost like a cassette tape, but a little bit bigger. They can be installed internally inside systems, or it can be an external drive. It uses magnetic tape medium. And again, cassette tapes are the best example of this for you millennials out there. That was, what we used to listen to music before it got all fancy and digital. It goes from, like, you have a reel of magnetic tape, which looks like the stuff on the back of the credit cards, and it stores the information on that. It's really great for holding very large amounts of data and over long periods of time, because the information doesn't degrade as much over time as it may on a USB or on floppy drives or on mechanical hard drives. So it's great for long-term storage, typically used for archives. The downfall is it is extremely slow getting information from it. So as a backup medium, if you do like a full backup, pulling your information from this takes a long time. But the thing is the information that you wrote to it is still in good working order. So internal tape drives can be hooked up either with SATA, PATA, or SCSI connections. Externals, typically USB, FireWire, or eSATA. And the E standing for external. Questions on this? Nope. All right.
When was FireWire introduced?
When was it introduced?
Yeah, FireWire.
I would say late 90s, early 2000s is when it kind of came into play. And you had the FireWire 400, and at the time there was nothing even close to the transfer speeds. It was awesome.
And then it became common after.
I wouldn't say it ever really became common, but it did have a pretty significant market share, especially for like external hard drives, for those DS players out there, of course, Nintendo. But it never became super common. And then technology just kind of passed by it. You had when the USB-C came out, it pretty much was blowing everybody else out of the water, and it was just kind of like, all right, you guys got to get on board. We've already got the technology. This is the standard. You aren't beating it anytime soon. You might want to get on this train. And so that's kind of what happened. So FireWire and all that stuff's kind of being phased out. And some of the older USBs, they maintained a couple standard USB ports on a computer just for, because people like me who have a mouse that is 25 years old that we refuse to get rid of, it's our lucky mouse. We've had it forever. We don't want to move up to a USB-C. But that's basically where it is. But it was a pretty extremely fast connection for its time. How many people here remember the 3.5-inch floppy, like I have on my shirt here? So the 3.5-inch stored all of 3.5 to 4 megabytes. Massive storage. And then later on, we moved up to what was the next step up from that? It looked like a really fat version of it. Do we remember those?
Yeah, I forgot the name. It was called
hard disks.
Not hard disks.
No, I don't say it.
Because of the
iOmega?
iOmega? No, not quite. Starts with a Z.
Zip drive?
Zip drive. There you go.
Zip drive. Yeah,
it was like a fat version of this particular one. And then they even had ones for a while called jazz drives. Great name, pretty good technology, just never really caught on. So you had to have, it like had a small cult following that kind of went for that, but it never really developed enough market share to be viable. All right. So now moving in, how are we going to connect these awesome and amazing drives to our computers so that we can actually have a conversation and or store our data to them? So as we've seen before, they can be internal or external. Our standard internals are IDE or PATA, same thing. That's that big flat ribbon that connects to it. And those can either be 40 or 80 pins. That's your standard connections, 40 or 80 pin PATA connections. Moving up to the most common ones we have today is the SATA connection. Hands down, the vast majority of the time when you're making an internal connection to a drive, it is going to be SATA. On rare occasions, you may also see a SCSI connector. Looks almost like a serial port for an external with some slight differences. But we'll have a picture of that here in a couple slides so you can take a look at it. So that's the internal connections we have. Externally, you have the eSATA or external SATA. You have the USB family, 2.0, 3.0, C, and then all the other varieties that we showed you. Firewire, which is becoming a little more of a legacy technology, and then Ethernet or your RJ45 connectors. So IDE or PATA, talked about these here a little bit. IDE stands for Integrated Drive Electronics. PATA, Parallel Advanced Technology Attachment. Do you really need to know that? Not so much, but sometimes knowing the acronym lets you know what it goes to. So it can give you a good indicator of where it's supposed to be used or if it's not a good answer for the question. The maximum cable length it has is about 18 inches, not very big, right? That's why we use it internally. All of them, of the PATAs, use the Molex, the 4-pin power connectors. Sometimes there's a mini Molex, which is a little bit smaller, but for the most part, it's that big 4-pin connector. Support speeds up to 133 megabytes per second. Do you need to remember that? No. IDE drives can be connected onto a single ribbon because usually they'll have the ribbon that goes up. There's a connector halfway up the ribbon, and then there's a connector at the end, and that allows you to set up your primary, secondary drive combinations if you wish. And then may also be used to connect to CD-ROM, DVDs, and zips, but usually about the point when we got to DVD, they were upgrading to the SATA connectors. So here's what it looks like. Big flat ribbon like we talked about here, so it's very easily identifiable on the inside of a computer. You have your 40 pin and your 80 pin. Are they always black and blue? No, they can be of a pretty big variety of colors depending on the manufacturer, but just give you an idea of how many pins are connected. And then the back of the drive, it will hook in right here. For your jumper block, which we talked about before, here's the variety of combinations you can use by blocking off the pins so the drive knows what it's meant to be used for. Do you need to memorize this? No, you don't. Because a lot of times this is done via software now, not through a hardware connection.
Is it always that like ribbon type wire that we see?
For IDE and PATA, yes.
Okay, so it's always the ribbon. Gotcha.
For IDE and PATA. For SATA, no. That's a different type of connection, but that's how you quickly identify an IDE or PATA. It's that big flat ribbon.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. That was them trying to avoid crosstalk in the wires. All right, so pretty straightforward on that. SATA, hands down, most common one we use today. Serial transmission or serial advanced transmission technology, I guess. Can't remember. Rough top man, I'm moving too fast here. Connects a singular device to the motherboard. You usually have a bank of connectors that you can hook up to multiple drives if you so choose. As many of you may have seen on the motherboard lab and test out that I've been getting such rave reviews on. Now it is also smaller than the PATA connection. It doesn't have that big, wide, fat ribbon. It's more like just a standard thin cable. So it's a little bit easier. It has a little bit longer connection length, about 3 feet, 1 meter, roughly. It allows for hot swapping, technically. And it has multiple versions, SATA 1, 2, and 3. And it allows you to push our 3.2s plug directly into your PCIe connection, but it requires a motherboard with SATA E support. Thank you. Serial Advanced Technology Assessment. I was having a moment on that one. All right, SATA standards. Lots of wonderful, amazing, beautiful information here. Do we need to know all this? Because I know that's anytime I come to a page packed with data, that's the first thing that enters your mind. Oh my goodness, do I need to know all this? No. I would focus more on SATA 1, speed limit, 1.5 gigabit per second. SATA 2, 3 gigabit. SATA 3, 6. Or you can just remember 1.5 and it doubles every version. Whatever makes it easier for you to remember. Questions on this? No? Man, experts already. I love this. Okay, SATA cables. On the back of the drive, you have your power, SATA power, which is a bit longer one, looks like this, and it has that signature L shape right there. And then you have the data, which is the shorter L shape as well. So right here, you can see a little L. It still remains, it has a jumper block if you so choose to use that. And then it will have, if you choose not to use the SATA power, right here, some of the older ones still maintain the 4-pin Molex connector. So you could use either or, because maybe your power supply doesn't have an extra SATA power, but you do have a Molex, or maybe your computer is old enough to where, or your power supply is old enough to where they haven't upgraded to the SATA power. You can still use 4-pin. Questions on this? All right. SCSI connector, small computer system interface standard. Typically used in servers. Sometimes you'll see them in desktops, but it is exceedingly rare. They can support up to 7 to 15 devices. Nice. And provides a little bit better performance than the ATA standards, which is typically why you see it in servers. And here's some examples of what they look like, the inside of the connectors. Like I was saying, it still has a general shape like a serial or an old printer connector, but internally it looks just a little bit different. So, SCSI connector. Any questions on this? No? All right. eSATA. External, same as internal SATA, but to be used outside the computer. As you see, the connector looks a little bit different here. So it has a pretty different shape. Some of the SATA connectors, as you see where it says eSATA plus USB, gives us that USB. It means you can even use this as a USB connector if you so choose, or an eSATA connector. So it's a multifunction port. Cable externally allows for up to 2 meters. So instead of 3 feet, you now get 6. Questions on eSATA? All right. Aminata, what is number 1 here? What is that? What kind of drive is that? So number one right here.
SSD.
SSD, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yay. Oh.
See here. Ume, what is number two right here?
I guess it is DVD.
DVD, are we sure? What's that symbol on the front here?
I don't know.
You don't know? Devin, can you help out?
Would that be an optical drive?
It is an optical drive. I like the precision on it. What kind of optical drive?
Blu-ray DVD.
Blu-ray. Blu-ray drive. Excellent.
Drive. Sorry.
No worries. But optical is fair. Crystal, can you help me out with number three? What are we looking at there?
Well, I wanted to answer number two. This one is an HDD drive.
Okay. What's another name for that?
Surveillance?
I hope not.
No, high definition. SATA.
Well, it hooks up via SATA.
Hard disk drive.
Madison's got you in chat. Hard disk
Okay,
drive. There you go.
yeah.
Hard disk drive. We also call those mechanical drives. Has all the moving parts.
Okay,
you can even kind of see that round shape right here, which is where the platter would be.
Medicine, that's not fair. You didn't do that for me, but you give answer to Crystal. That's not fair.
And as we can quickly see, it is a 4 terabyte drive right there on the cover. So good work, good work. Again, progress, not perfection. Don't be afraid to get things wrong. Give it a shot. Give it a try. Questions continue. Blanca, can you tell me what number one is? What kind of connection is that right there? What are we looking at?
USB.
So right here, you said things USB. Has kind of an L shape to it.
It looked like a micro.
Not quite a micro. You're seeing it from the bottom, which is why it's a little confusing.
Yeah.
Firewire.
I don't know. It's like an
SATA.
HDM.
It's internal. So internal, we have three options. We have PETA, SATA, and SCSI.
Is that SATA since it's L shaped?
It's L-shaped. That makes it a SATA. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that is SATA. If it was the long one here, it's the short one. So is that data or power?
Oh.
Data.
Data. Excellent. So the big one over here is also L-shaped. That's our power.
I'm sorry. And the number 2 is like the ribbon one.
Yep. So what do we call that?
I remember that it's a ribbon something.
So there's two names for it.
Yeah. No, I just remember that part. Ribbon something.
So it's a ribbon shape. Eski, can you help us out with that?
Yeah, is it PETA or IDE?
Perfect. PATA or PETA or IDE drive. Excellent. Let me see off to the side. They have that 4-pin Molex attached for power. All right. And then finally.
One question real quick, sorry. Do I have this right? Long is for power and short is for data for the SATA?
You are absolutely correct.
Thank you.
And while I got you there, Artez, what's this last one here? What kind of connection is that? We've already talked about IDE PATA. We've talked about SATA. What's our last one for internal?
Will that be IDE PATA, SATA, and SCSI? SC.
Yep.
IC. I mean SC.
SCSI, SCSI. Excellent.
SCSI.
That's what we're looking for.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, Ume.
I have a lot of concern. Like,
Actually, in person, I'm not familiar with those, which is maybe uncommon. So I'm saying like when you give the lecture, you give like lots of introduction, all of this, lots of description. But when you're testing our knowledge, you are giving us this picture. For me, like I'm not familiar with any of most of them in person.
Okay. Well, that's why we're going through. We have the pictures as we're talking about them originally. So we had the different versions of SCSI drives here, and this is the connector. And then we're just reviewing after we've gone through them to make sure we're kind of remembering what we see.
Yeah, if you you know, because we students, I'm gonna help the student. If you follow, I learned that for myself when I'm following the Nearpod as he's doing it. If I'm following the Nearpod on my computer by myself, then I understand it more. I could even take better notes while the class is going. So maybe if you follow in the Nearpod, you could even refer back to it while he's asking the questions. And that was a help for me. So maybe that could help anybody else.
Yeah, open up the Nearpod from the Slack so you can go back if he's going too fast on something and you missed it. You can go back and take a screenshot of it, you know?
Right.
Okay,
Even writing
so
things down is gonna.
on number 3, this is connector. The long thing you just asked right now
Right here.
is connector.
Yeah, it's a SCSI connector.
All right. Okay.
SCSI SCSI.
Yeah, my Nearpod is open, but the thing is, I didn't knew this before, and I guess who is remembering? Like, I guess I'm not sure. They knew it before. This is not like first time.
Well, that's why we have the readings set for before. So this is also not the first time you're seeing it. So we don't expect high absorption in the readings, but when we come through the lecture, then it's more the second time you're seeing it. So it's a little bit more easier to absorb.
All right.
Yes, Crystal. You are on mute, ma'am.
Sorry about that. I do apologize. Could you repeat what was number 2 again, please? Because something broke up and I couldn't hear everything at that time. Did you say that number 2 was PATA?
Yes.
Okay.
Or it's either PATA or IDE.
Okay.
Those are interchangeable.
Right. And then the colorful cord to the right of it is the power cord, correct?
Yes, and we
All right.
refer to that as a 4-pin Molex because there's 4 posts.
4-pin Molex. Okay.
And Molex is the type of plastic they used to make the heads, so we just call it a 4-pin Molex.
Thank you for repeating that.
No problem.
Kelly, I got one question. For number 2, how do we know it's PATA just from looking at it? Because that could be like helpful for people that can't identify it.
The PATA has that flat ribbon rather than like a thin cable like this. So you see how the cable itself is just like this flat, big, broad ribbon. And then SATA is just like a normal cable like you would see, like a round cable like you would use to plug in your phone or something like that. So the cable is very thin. Does that make sense?
No, yes, it makes a lot of sense. I was trying to if you say the same thing in different languages or different ways, sometimes another person can grasp it.
I try to do it as many different ways as I can, but yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
Even because that's true. That's true. I think we're gonna have to as to go in our like study groups and share how to take notes and how to keep up with the lecture, because that's another thing about being a student, studying also, but learning how to study and learning how to take notes is very important.
Yes, that was my biggest challenge when I first entered the program. Was I had no clue how to study. I'd never honestly really studied before, and so I literally had to learn from scratch how to study and what was effective and efficient for me.
That's very true. Like Artez said, like talking to people in study groups, I've realized that a lot of people tend to not understand the way things are explained because they're very technical. and it's not very easy to understand something technical. It's literally another language. And like Artez said, you know, you go into study groups and you speak to everybody else and you start to realize like, oh, I thought y'all was all getting it. No, we weren't. We were just really good at hiding it in the lecture, and then we start studying afterwards.
So what
I
you're
tried
saying is
to-
I need to add more tests.
No. Yo, this man.
How did we get here?
It don't make sense, bro.
How did we get here? How did no?
I think that if we just pay more attention to the reading, like you just really focus on the reading.
Well, the reading is your, the reading is your introduction. That's your first exposure. I should be your second exposure.
Right.
That's what I was talking about in first week, is if when I'm lecturing on it, that is the first time you're seeing it, it's going to be really hard to absorb.
Yeah.
Which is why I schedule the readings ahead of my lectures. That way you're getting that initial exposure. It may not all click. And then when we start talking about it in class, it makes a little bit more sense. And then the questions are a little bit more picking at it and diving into weak spots rather than, oh my goodness, this is the first time I'm seeing this. This is way too much for anybody to take in at one time. So it's, you know, understandable if it is your first exposure. Yes, that's a ton. Yes, George.
I was going to say what also helped me too, because I read first and then I do the lecture as well, but I don't understand everything all the time either. But what helps me is if I'm stuck on something in particular, I make a note of it and then I'll go back and watch a YouTube video on it. And that helps me a lot too.
Yeah.
Just as much as I can get information as I can on it, like I'll do it. Even like Reddit or something.
Yeah. Well, and like with some things, like we do rate arrays today. And with that, I usually share a video from PowerCert where he talks about rate arrays, because he does these at least relatively entertaining graphics or animations while he's explaining RAID. And for some, after we've talked about it and you've read about it, and then the way he explains it, it kind of clicks. So, but I'll drop that in Slack a little bit later today. So, all right. Any other questions before we get going?
They're praising you in the comments, Kelly.
That's just because they're hoping that it affects the grade. I don't listen to that stuff. No, I really do appreciate it. I really do. I try to get as much of a variety as we can, and I do listen to criticism. I honestly try to improve, and I don't sit up here thinking I am the pinnacle of all IT knowledge and everything I say is 100 absolute correct and my word is law. That is not the way I approach things. There are times that Rachel has mastery of a subject that I don't, DW does, and there are times when y'all do. And I learn from my students every time. My goal is to just try to get better each time.
I would say for everybody that's having trouble with the technical stuff, not that Kelly has no like accountability to it, because you know sometimes he may not be able to explain something in a way that we can understand, but it is only his job to deliver the information. It's our job to try and understand it better. And a lot of the time, if you if you can't have the time to yourself while you're in the lecture, that's a little bit harder if you don't have time afterwards. But afterwards, I realized that if just talking with people that don't understand it, you realize how you can explain it better. So study groups are very good.
Again, that was what I said. Without my study group, I probably wouldn't have been near as successful in the course.
Yeah,
I had a
for
guy in our
me,
class do what?
For me, the study group, like I'm scared because I think the other people are gonna know like how little I know. So that's why I'm scared.
Ume,
Here's
let
the
me
secret.
tell you,
We were all here.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
We're all in the same boat.
You know, I knew literally nothing about a computer before I came here. There's so many people that don't know anything before they started this program. So don't think you're the only one here. Okay?
Trust me,
there's
you're not alone.
probably more than half the class started with zero knowledge of computers.
The first thing Kelly told me, the first time we spoke, the first thing that he told me was, I actually have an advantage. He said, have you dealt with computers or anything like that before? I said, no. He said, you have an advantage. I said, what's that? And he said, you know what you don't know. He was like, you know what you don't know. So just from this point on, just be an open book, just listen, pay attention, and you should be fine. He said some of the most successful people from this class had no experience before this class. Some of his most successful students. So
Yeah, came
just
in.
keep plugging away. Just keep plugging away.
We had a young lady in our last cohort that had never even turned a computer on 3 months prior to entering the course. In her
Alright.
life, she had never turned a computer on.
Oh my God.
All right, can I just add this last thing for Ume and for everybody in the class? Is it's very important to use your community. Like, if you can't be used, you are useless. You understand? So if you think that somebody know more, you should go and try to because greatness sharpens greatness. Still sharpens still.
Iron sharpens iron.
Yes. So if you're thinking this person is smart, then you really have to get next to that person. Even with money, after these things, we have to get close to the people that have the money. We can't, you understand? We got to network and understand, all right, this person knows this person knows this. I need to get my way in and not be afraid to not know. Because when you not know, it's an opportunity to know. And that's what life is. Life is every day is learning. So once you not know and you can learn, you feel like you're living, at least for me.
Growth mindset.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I do want to add something real quick. You can go.
Fast. Just looking at it from a different angle here. Amaya, what's number 1? What are we looking at here? What kind of connector is that?
Is it eSATA?
It's not an eSATA. This is an internal connection. We're looking at number 1 right here. Number 1.
IDE?
IDE. That is a fair. Yes. Excellent. IDE. Good job, man. All right.
Kelly, am I allowed to annotate on your screen as well?
Yes, you can.
Oh, I was just testing that out.
That's so funny.
Usually it's about halfway through the class that people start figuring that out.
Did you start recording again?
Yes, I am
Help
recording.
everybody now.
Let's see here. Galen, what's number 2, please? What are we looking at here?
Flat ribbon. Oh, that is Pada.
Pada. Perfect.
Thanks, Adriel.
And then finally, we have number 3. Ian, can you please tell us what is number 3, please? This one's a little complicated because it's an external connector. It's not an internal.
Did you say Ian or Ian?
Ian, sorry. How do you pronounce it properly?
Ian.
Ian?
Yeah.
Thank you. I will do that. I will pronounce it correctly from now on. Ian.
Is it eSATA?
It absolutely is. eSATA. Excellent. All right. Turn off my annotator tool. All right, before we get into RAID, I know y'all are excited, so I'm going to give you let's take about a 12-minute break to build the anticipation and get up, walk around, stretch our legs, all that fun stuff.
Hey,
I have a question. Oh.
What,
Yeah, go ahead, say something.
tell me, what's the difference between
That world, do you need to have an in-depth, detailed knowledge of what RAID is? Not really. You do need to have a good understanding as to kind of how it works. And for the purposes of the exam, they focus on 4, technically 5, different levels of RAID. Now, what exactly is RAID? Now, depending on what you read, it's either a redundant array of independent disks or a redundant array of inexpensive disks. So there's, depending on the source you're using, the acronym means something different, but it's basically the same thing. And essentially, this is a data storage technology that takes multiple physical disk drives and components and moves them into a single logical unit. And you can have an internal or external RAID array. So the main purpose of it is you're either trying to get data redundancy, like data integrity is really big. Like if you work for like a credit card company, you don't want to lose who owes you money, right? So you want to make sure that you have backups of this data so that you can go back and make sure that your business can continue to function. So data integrity, or we would call that redundancy. So you're making copies of that data, or you're trying to get faster read and write capabilities out of those drives. So those are the 2 main things that you're going to be looking for in a RAID array. So you either want redundancy or a duplicating of the data, copies of it, or better speed, or sometimes both. So this is what we're looking at. Also, it allows for the potential for fault tolerance, which basically means a drive can fail and you don't lose everything. That's not true for all RAID arrays, but for many of them, if a single drive would fail, you're still okay. You can rebuild back from that. Yes, Crystal.
Thank you. So this is not like most at-home users would not use this, right? This is mostly for like corporations and small businesses and stuff like that.
You might use it at home. Like I'm now on the cusp of where I'm going to have to.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like a network attached storage or a NAS, which would be like a RAID array that you would use to store all the media for your household. So yeah, some households may use it. It just depends on what you're using your systems for. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that a independent user would use it at their home.
The reason I was asking is because my father is our family historian and he has a lot of photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, in my mind, like this interprets to something that he could use for all of the photographs because he has so many. And I'm thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but would this RAID make it easy for him to find the photographs? Like,
well, I mean, that's actually going to be more in your ability to database, but this would make it so that it was the data was less vulnerable. When I started databasing the photographs from my grandfather, my data redundancy became critical. I was not about to lose these photographs from when he was a child and stuff like that. I want to be able to maintain this stuff.
Right.
Yes, Francis. So I think she's trying to add.
So just to help out a little bit as far as photo storage, if you do, I mean, not to mention the dreaded overlord Amazon, but if you do have an Amazon account with Prime, you have free, unlimited photo storage. So I would say that's the first step for like cloud backup. And yes, you could use RAID array. Just if you're already buying into Amazon, then you've already got it part of your subscription.
There you go. Thank you. I didn't know about the unlimited photo storage for Amazon. But yeah, I mean, the data redundancy would be great because then the photos would be at less risk, for keeping stuff in-house. But as far as being able to find the stuff faster, that depends on the software you're using for your photo management. Because some of them can use facial recognition. I could say, pull up all the pictures of me, and it would go through all my photos and pull out every single picture that has my face in it. Or I could say, you know, Allison, and it would go and it would pull out all the pictures of her based off of the facial recognition. So that would be a fast way to go through it, but that's kind of a niche way to look at it. So the way RAID works is, the way we typically think about a hard drive is like, I keep writing to hard drive C until hard drive C is full, and then I move over to hard drive D, and then I start writing into hard drive D. The way RAID arrays work, they don't operate like that. What they do is they distribute the data across multiple drives. So think of it like, if I'm trying to save an image, think of it almost like a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle that you would put together. It would be taking, like if I had 3 drives, I would take 1/3 of those pieces and put it in one bucket, which would be drive C, 1/3 of those pieces, put it in another bucket, which would be drive D, and 1/3 of those pieces and put it in another bucket, which would be drive E. So I've taken that picture, that single picture, and I've scattered that data across 3 drives. That's kind of how it's working. So it's 3 drives working as a single logical unit. Yes, Ramon.
Does it do that to avoid corruption?
Not necessarily to avoid corruption. Again, it's more for data redundancy and speed. So it's making copies and or making that process happen faster. And then you also can have increased storage because of it as well. So, but what it does offer is, if you're using certain ones of these, if a particular drive gets corrupted, you can remove that drive and put in another one and rebuild the data. So the different
data
RAID level.
redundancy is when like a same piece of data is held in 2 places.
Yeah,
in
it's a
more than one
copy.
place?
So
Okay.
redundancy is just a fancy way of saying copy. Like
Gotcha.
form factor is a fancy way of saying shape and size.
Okay.
So when we say redundancy, we mean copy. And usually they'll put that under the blanket of what's called data integrity. They want to make sure that the data that they have is safe, and if something happens, they're able to re-establish that data. So the RAID array levels that we need to be aware of are 0, 1, 5. That's the, you know, those 3. And then the last 2 are basically the same one, but just how they're set up slightly changes. So you have 0.1 or 1.0, or 1 and what's me, 0 plus 1 or 1 plus 0, which basically it's a combination of the first 2 types, but it's just the way that it's originally set up tells you whether it's a 1 plus 0 or 0 plus 1. But essentially they operate the same. Yes, Amaya.
Is the data stored copying is automatic or manually you duplicate inside the...
Well, you would set up the system, the RAID array, and then it would have a memory controller that would break up the data for you. So once you've set up what type of RAID array you're having, it's going to manage that for you. Now, an external device, which would look something like this right here, it has its own built-in memory controller, and it's much faster. That's called a hardware RAID. They do have ones that can work internally in your computer, like Windows has a built-in system you can use to set up RAID and manage it. That is an internal or a software RAID. It's not as fast, but you're able to do a lot of the same stuff. Yes, Babakar.
In other words, RAID is more reliable. Like it tolerates like loss of data, and it acts like nothing happens.
It can.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that here in the next slide. We're going to get into some of the different types.
Okay.
So first RAID type we need to talk about is RAID 0. The nickname for RAID 0 is striping. It's basically, it's writing the data across the drives. So remember the jigsaw puzzle I was talking about, where you had the picture and you were breaking it up into little pieces and putting part of it in one drive and part of it in the other? That's exactly what a RAID 0 is doing. So if I had 2 drives here and I'm having them operate as a RAID 0, my first bit, the first bit of information as it comes in, writes to drive 1. The second bit comes in, it drops in drive 2. And the third bit goes to drive 1. And then the fourth bit goes to drive 2. And it keeps alternating between the two as each bit comes into the storage device. So the picture essentially in this case would be broken up in half. Half the puzzle pieces would go in one bucket. The other half of the puzzle pieces would go in the other bucket. And that's how we store it. But because we're using 2 drives, it can write a lot faster. So instead of waiting for 1 drive to write every single bit, you have 2 drives quickly writing, and they're able to write the information down significantly faster. So it's much faster than a single drive working alone. And of course I stopped share, which was just not what I was intending to do. And now it's giving me problems again. Go team. Too much fun. There we go. All right, are you seeing it over here again? Okay, good. Don't click buttons. So, okay, so RAID 0 breaks a single picture up into a big puzzle, puts half of it in one, half it in the other. You need to have a minimum, absolute minimum of 2 drives to do a RAID 0. So in order to start, 2 drives minimum. That way you can break up the pieces into multiple chunks. You can have more than 2, but 2 is your starting point. So minimum of 2. Here's the downfall. It's faster. Go ahead, Artest.
So if you have more than 2, right? So you have 3. And then, so 1 piece go in the first one, the second piece go in the second one, the third piece go in the third one.
Yeah, and then it starts over. 4th piece goes in the first one, 5th one goes in the second, 6th one goes in the third. Back to the beginning. 7th in the first, 8th in the second, 9th in the third. So it's just breaking the data down into 3 pieces.
No problem.
So, and it writes faster because it's not waiting for the head to write to a single drive. You have multiple drives writing the data, so it goes much faster. The problem with it is it does not provide any redundancy. So there's no copy, no backup. So if a single drive in your RAID array fails, you lose everything. So you have 3 drives, single drive fails, you lose everything. So RAID 0, though it is faster, you're increasing your risk because the risk of 1 of 3 drives failing is much higher than the risk of just a single drive failing. But you do gain additional speed. But because of that data risk, RAID 0 is pretty rarely used. You do get a lot more storage space, but again, the risk outweighs the benefits, so people tend not to gravitate towards a RAID 0. Yes, Ninja.
Why would you say 1 would be safer than the 3 drives?
Because if there's a 1 in 10 chance that this Seagate drive fails. So I have a 10% chance of the Seagate drive failing. So that's just a 1 drive, no problem, right? Or, minimal problem. Now, if I have 3 of them with a 10% chance of failing, you're now at 30% chance of failure because you have the 10% risk of every single drive. So you're increasing your vulnerability with a RAID 0.
Got it.
All right. Now, RAID 1. So RAID 0, nicknamed striping. Striping the data across each of the drives or kind of scratching that information across the drives. RAID 1 is called mirroring or duplexing. All this is making a copy. Whatever you write on disk 1 gets copied to disk 2. Easiest one to remember. It's mirroring, just complete duplication. So you get more data integrity, but you actually lose speed. So it's happening slower because the data, the memory controller takes up a little bit of processing time, writing to a single drive and then writing to the other drive. It actually works a little bit slower than just a single drive alone. But you have higher data integrity. You can, you have a minimum of 2 drives. You can go up from there, but you got to go up in pairs. But you can lose up to half of your data. But typically the way they say it is you can lose 1 drive and you're still okay. So, because usually we'd have 2. So 2 drives minimum, you could lose 1, you're still fine. Because all you do is plug in another one, you copy that drive to the new drive, and you're up and running. Questions on RAID 1, mirroring or duplexing? All right. Next, RAID 5. This is by far the most popular at the time. And you remember when we were talking about RAM and we mentioned parity? Who wants to give me a brief explanation of what parity is? Don't have to get too complex, but basically, what is it?
Parity is when it...
Error detection.
Recovery. Okay. So what is the basic function of it? Like, I mean, what do we do? How do we determine parity?
It resends the prompt. Like,
well, but how do we know? How do we know we need to resend it? So
it looks at the 1 and 0. Yeah.
Odd and even, but how do we determine the odd and even? What is the individual mechanism to determine that odd or even?
There can only be 4 bits. So
well, no, there could be more than 4 bits, but remember, it adds 1 extra bit. That's our parity bit. And the sole purpose of that bit is to say whether the data that came before it should be odd or even. So it's a single bit added to a stream of data that tells you whether it's supposed to be odd or even. That way, if a bit has dropped or not come through, we know what it should be to make that odd or even platform. The same thing is happening here in a RAID 5.
Sorry, Kelly, can you repeat the last?
So what it is you have that extra bit that tells you whether the string of data you've received should be odd or even. And what that tells you is the data that you have received, if a bit gets dropped, it happens in transmission where 1 bit just doesn't come through. The bit that was missing, based upon that parity bit, I can say, I know what that bit's supposed to be. If it comes through as odd and I'm showing an even parity, I know that it needs to be a 1 to make it even. If it comes through odd and it's supposed to be an odd parity, I know it's supposed to be a 0 because it wouldn't change it. So a RAID 5 does what's called a distributed parity bit. So it distributes that parity bit across all the drives. So when data comes in, so in this example, we have a 5-disk array. The first bit that comes in would go into the disk 1. The second bit would go into disk 2. We see that as A2. The third bit would go into A3. The fourth bit coming in would go into A4. And then we would have our parity bit, which tells us if this data was supposed to be odd or even. In order to make this more secure, the next line of data down, they would put the parity bit in the 4th disk rather than the 5th. So your 5th bit would go in 1, your 6th bit would go in 2, 7th bit would go in 3, 8th bit would go in 5, and then your parity bit would be in 4. So you see that P parity bit gets distributed across the 5 drives. What this does is if I lose a drive, because this is like data striping, it's striping the data across it much like a RAID 0, but we've added a parity bit. So what happens is if I lose an entire drive, either I have the information like I do here, or I have the parity bit, which tells me what was missing. So with the use of the parity bit, I'm able to reconstruct the lost data of a failed drive. So with a RAID 5 parity, or with a RAID 5 striping with parity, I need a minimum of 3 drives, but a whole drive's worth of space is going to be dedicated to that parity bit. So I have 3 drives. I can lose a single drive and still be okay. And this operates almost as fast as a RAID 0, but I get some data integrity in the mix as well. So that's why this is one of the most popular used today. Yes, Donnie.
So if you had 3, it would be, the parity bit would be on the 3rd drive instead of.
It would still distribute. So like, let me grab this here.
So would it still go 4 and then parity?
So what it would do, so
Like it-
say
like
I only
it
had
shows
3
in the thing?
drives, these 2 drives don't function, right? So
Okay.
I only have 3 drives. So I would have bit 1, bit 2, parity bit.
Okay.
And the next one down, since it distributes, I would have bit 2, parity bit, bit 3.
Gotcha.
And then the next byte down, I would have parity bit, bit 5, bit 6. So the parity bit gets distributed across the 5 drives, but it allows you to reconstruct the data in a pretty efficient way.
Okay.
If you lose up to 1 drive. So this is striping with parity, 3 drive minimum, and lose up to 1. So a fault tolerance of a single drive. Any questions on that?
So
How
the parity
often-
is spread over
Sorry,
all
go
the
for it.
disks. I'm sorry.
Yes, it's spread across all the disks.
Okay.
I've never done a RAID before, but I know what they are. How often do does a parity come into play? How often do errors come up on like SSDs or HDDs? I know HDDs probably.
Well, again,
more.
this is trying to account for a whole drive failure. So if an entire drive is removed, based on the parity bit, they can reconstruct that drive. How often does it happen? Enough to where you might want to keep one in play.
Okay.
Which is why people tend not to go with RAID 0. They tend to go with a RAID 5. And I know you've never done a RAID array there, George, and that's admirable. And I know what you're thinking. Is there some way we can practice setting up RAID arrays and work with this stuff and get a chance to actually build one ourselves?
I was actually being cheap. I didn't want to replace a hard drive. That's what I was thinking about. Like, how often do hard drives fail?
Well, I'm here to say you're welcome. There is a test out lab.
Yeah, I saw it.
That will help you practice, and they do it a couple different ways. So, all right, let me erase that. So the next one, which is the last one you really need to worry about, it's basically all it is a combination of RAID 0 and RAID 1. That's all it is. It's like a hybrid. So they either call it RAID 10, which is 1 plus 0, or they call it 0 plus 1. And so it's called, its nickname is either a mirror of stripes or a stripe of mirrors. And what it is you basically are using a bracketing system. You need to have a minimum of 4 drives. And so you have like a RAID 1 here, which is your mirroring. So you would have a RAID 1 here, and you would have a RAID 1 here. So you have 2 RAID 1s, and then you would stripe across those 2 sets of RAID 1s. So it would send 1 bit of data here. And since it's a RAID 1, it would be duplicated to drive 2. The second piece of data would go to disk 3, and then be mirrored over to disk 4. So you have a set of mirrors and another set of mirrors that are being striped to. So RAID 0 into RAID 1. The other version of this, which is the 0 plus 1 is you would have two sets of stripes that are mirrored to each other. So the first bit of data would go to disk 1, the second bit would go to disk 2, and then that whole thing would be mirrored over to disk 3 and 4. So if you have an extreme need for data integrity, this is a setup you would see pretty often. You can lose up to half of the drives. On a 4-drive rig, it's up to 2 drives. And why do we say up to? Because it depends on what drives fail. So over here where we have the RAID 10, you have your mirrors over here, right? So you have the first bit goes into this group and the second bit goes into this group, right? So if you lose drives 1 and 2, you're done. You've lost all your data because you're losing half of it. If I lost disk 1 and disk 3, I'm okay, because I have a mirror of the data that was lost. So it really depends on which drives fail on the 0 plus 1 or the 1 plus 0, which is why they say up to half your drives. Does this make sense? Do we think RAID is the most awesome thing ever? We're glad this was introduced into our lifestyle.
Cap. But can you just do one more time the RAID 10? It said you stripping it, so it's like A1. Can you just explain it one more time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Did you have a real quick? Let's see. Did you have a question, George? Real quick.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, is there a benefit to each kind of RAID? Because I know most people do 5, but is there a benefit to doing suppose RAID 10 or RAID 1? Like is there for different purposes a different kind of RAID?
Yeah, I mean, we can go over that real quick here in a second. Let me just explain this and I'll go over it again. It depends on the benefits you're trying to get out of it. So again, so here we go. You have a RAID, you have a RAID 0, which is our striping, right? And that is inside of a RAID 1. So out of 4 drives, so I have a set of striping here. So as a RAID 0, we know it stripes the data across the drives. So the first bit of data would come in, and it would go to RAID, it would go to drive 1 here. The second bit would go to disk 2 as we're striping across it. Third bit would go to disk 1, fourth bit, disk 2, fifth bit, disk 1, sixth bit, disk 2. So it's striping across here. And then with RAID 1, we would mirror that to another set of striping data. So essentially disk 1 would be a copy of disk 3. Disk 2 would be a copy of disk 4. So it's mirrored over to these other set of drives. So in this situation, if I lost disk 1 and disk 2, I'm okay, because the whole situation is mirrored over to disks 3 and 4.
And
if
then
I lost disk 1 and disk 4, I'm okay, because I've mirrored across. If I lose disk 1 and disk 3, I'm hosed.
So it's basically user preference, like which one you prefer to set up the RAID as?
Kinda. It depends on your needs. So does that explain it, Artest?
Yes, that one is good. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, so let's go back to RAID 0. In this situation, all you're looking for is expanded storage and having that data written down faster, because it gives you much faster, because you have 2 drives writing the data simultaneously rather than having 1 drive trying to write the data, which is going to be slower. So all you're doing with RAID 0, increase speed. You don't care about data redundancy. You only live once. So you're just kind of, going off into the sunset and just hoping those drives can hang in there forever. So that's RAID 0. RAID 1, I really, really love my data and I don't want to see anything bad happen to it. I don't care if it slows me down. I can only get 2 disks. So that's the most important thing to me, is I don't lose my data. I have photographs of family members that are no longer around, and it would really break my heart if I lost them. RAID 1. it mirrors it. So it's complete data redundancy. Whatever I put in my first hard drive is copied to my second hard drive. If I lose a drive, I'm okay. My data is still good. RAID 5, I want to increase my storage capabilities, still have some pretty good performance boosts, but I'm not really going to YOLO with my data and just say, I don't care. I'm just going for it. I'm willing to buy that one extra drive to give me a little peace of mind. So I've got some speed increases here, not as much as a 0. And I got some data integrity. So if I lose a drive, the memory controller can rebuild that information for me and I'm still okay. And then we get into RAID 10. This is going to be your mid-sized business type of RAID arrays. Data integrity is really important. Law firms, credit card companies, financial institutions, what have you. You want to make sure all your data is preserved and you don't, because data is your business. You don't want to run the risk. So you're setting up a RAID 0 where you get a little bit increased performance, but you still have that redundancy built in too. It's a little bit more security than a RAID 5, and you still get a little bit of a speed boost. Because that was the 5th iteration of MAS. So it was like there is such thing as a RAID 3 and a RAID 4. So it was just which iteration came out. There's even a RAID 6 out there, which is, for those who are geeking out over RAID, it's a RAID 5 with an extra parity bit. So there's 2 parity bits rather than 1. That's a RAID 6. Do you need to know that? No. But it's just, think of it as versions that have come out. That's why they give them those numbers.
Thank you. Yeah, because I was wondering how you use each one, and I guess that makes a lot more sense. You explained it in terms of like one is for efficiency of data and another one is for speed. So that helped me a lot, actually.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's your balance, is that data speed, data integrity.
Thanks.
And that's what you're trying to balance. So that is essentially RAID. Take a screenshot of this particular slide so you know your minimum drives and the number of failures that you can accept before you lose all your data. Yes, Brianna.
So just to clarify, RAID 1 is more for having copies. Is that considered data integrity, copying your data? Okay,
it's redundancy, data integrity, and copy. It's kind of like.
And RAID 5 is most commonly used because of its speed.
Yeah, it gives speed with some data integrity.
Oh, okay, but not as much as RAID 1, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So like a RAID 1, if I have 4 drives and I lose 2, I'm still okay. If I have a RAID 5 and I have 6 drives and I lose 2 of those drives, it doesn't matter which 2 I lose, I'm done. I cannot recover.
Okay. Thank you.
So it gives you some, but not as much data integrity as a RAID 1 or a RAID 10. Excellent way to look at it. Any other questions on RAID? All right. Last little bit of it. So we talked briefly about this hardware RAID versus software RAID. Hardware RAID looked like that rig at the beginning when we were first talking about the RAID array, where it looks almost like a mini fridge and you're sliding in the RAID memory, like the hard drives in there, almost like toast into a toaster. You're just like locking it in really quick. If one goes bad, you can literally pull out the bad drive, shove in a new drive, and the memory controller will resync the drives for you. It works very quickly. That it actually allows for hot swapping. The controller itself has its own processor, its own memory, its own BIOS and ROM. So it works independently. So the information gets pushed to it and it does all the work from there. You use this because it's more expensive, but higher performance. Software RAID. The operating system you have on your computer, like Windows, would do all the RAID functions for you. It is processing intensive, so it does slow things down a bit. So smaller RAID solutions, this would work. You will get experience playing around with a couple of these. Different versions of Windows offer different capabilities with regards to RAID. And this is a situation when you would use when you don't have the money to shell out for a fancy hardware RAID array, but you can add some more drives to your bays in your computer and still get some of the similar functionality. Questions on that?
Yes, I have questions like if RAID goes bad, maybe one of them is not working. Am I gonna know it, and how I'm gonna know it?
Oh, it'll tell you. Like if it's a hardware RAID array, it'll let you know like you've had a drive failure.
No,
like
the software, like this software.
Well, the software one, like if it's a RAID 5, it would stop working because you wouldn't have the capability to actually do the stuff, and then you would know to swap out the drives and it could rebuild. So you would get a warning or an alert that a drive has failed.
All right.
So you would get an error code that would tell you drive D has failed. You know, or you might get what's called a smart error in advance and letting you know drive is starting to fail. That does happen too. No, Time Machine is not really a RAID. It's just a backup system. But good question. I do like that one. All right. So,
Kelly,
yes.
my fault. I don't know if it was being funny, but RAID is really cool though.
Again, from an engineering perspective, I think it's awesome, but a lot of people look at it and it seems a little daunting at first. And how I processed it was when I would come into class every day, we had, I was physically on site for 1001 at in a classroom, and they had whiteboards in the back of the room. And there was a few things I would do every day. And one of the things I would do was draw out the RAID arrays and how they worked, like how each cylinder would be and how the data would come in, and basically recreate these drawings. It only took me like a minute or so to do this, but I would just redraw this stuff every day until I could do it without fail. And then I had an idea as to how it worked.
If I could flip my camera right now, that's I have the diagrams drawn just so I can understand it.
Yeah,
that's the easiest way to learn, man.
Yeah,
I was confused until I took all the information down, wrote the words, but until I drew these diagrams, I'm saying, oh, I got it. I understand it.
We learn through pictures more so than words on a page. So if you can actually draw it out in pictures, like memory experts, like when they try to remember a long string of numbers, like there's like some of the Guinness Book of World people can memorize like over 100 numbers in order in like under 30 seconds. And they'll tell you how they do it is they create a pictographical image or a picture for every number. And then the numbers tell a story in their mind. It's a series of pictures, not a series of numbers. And then they're able to remember it.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you go back to the hardware RAID and software RAID page again for me?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
But for me, there was a couple things that I drew out every day, and I'll let you know what they are. But this was one of them. Every day when I came in, I would draw out the RAID arrays just so I could picture it in my mind and understand as the data is coming in, how is it working? What is it doing? All right. Questions on this? Yes. All right. So
I have a question.
yes, come here.
So the basic difference between the different arrays is it an application that you
Well, I mean,
is it
a single
software?
rig can, like, if you have 4 drives sitting in front of you, you can set them up as a RAID 0, a RAID 1, a RAID 5, or a RAID 10.
Okay.
It depends, like, and then the applications, like, or the programs on the, like, the hardware RAID or the software RAID will likely say, how do you want to set this up? Do you want a 0, 1, 5, or 10? So you would choose, and then once you have chosen, it will start distributing the data accordingly.
Okay. That's,
does that make sense?
yes, thank you.
No problem. Galen, are you good on this page? All right, cool. So done with RAID. Now we can talk about, you know, some factors to consider when getting a hard drive. The biggest one usually is, how much does it hold? You know, how much stuff can I put on it? That's usually one of the biggest things. Magnetic drives, if you have really large amounts of storage, magnetic drives tend to be your go-to. It could be the speed. As we talked about on magnetic drives, the spindle speed, the faster that is, the faster it can read and write data. What standard does it use? If I have PATA drives, I can't be getting a hard drive with a SCSI connector. Won't be able to talk. So what interface is it used? And then cache or buffer size, depending on, you know, how much reading and writing you're doing, can improve your performance. And that's usually between 2 to 128 megabytes per second. For those of you who have been in the DSLR market for a while, this is a really big thing when you're talking about SD cards, like how fast it can write to the card and how much buffer memory there is. Because if you just start firing away, eventually the camera's just going to stop because the buffer memory is full. It can't take in any more pictures and it has to process a little bit of what it's got before it can continue. Same thing with the hard drive. If you're pushing a whole bunch of information to it, if you exceed that buffer, it'll freeze you up and stop you from being able to write. All right, steps to install. Shut it down, unplug it, press the button for 3 to 5 seconds. Drain the residual power, never changes. Remove the computer case. Figure out which bay you want to put it in. Are you replacing a drive that's already in there? Are you adding a new one? Figure out which bay you're going to put it in and examine the location. Make sure that everything works, the data cords reach the size of the drive you're putting in. If you're putting in a 2.5 and do a 3.5 slot, you need that plastic adapter. Make sure you have that on hand. Everything fits, go ahead, slide it in, use a screwdriver to secure it. Some of them use clips. Decide which connectors you're going to use at that point, whether it be SATA or IDE. Make sure you secure those correctly. After that, power up your system and verify that your system can see the drives. Pretty straightforward. Drive bays will look like this inside your towers. Here's one that uses the clipping system right here. And then on this one, old school uses screws. Pretty straightforward. All right, so troubleshooting hard drive, slow performance. Over time, sectors can go bad. Writing and deleting and writing and deleting and writing and deleting, sectors can go bad. So it may not be able to do this over time. Also, as you're writing and deleting, the files you're putting in don't always fit into nice, neat little sections. We'll show that when we talk about file allocation tables. So it has to break the program up into smaller and smaller chunks in order to fit it on the hard drive. The way we've solved that, and so that it takes longer to draw that information off and be able to use it. So we use a tool called defragmentation, which basically rewrites all the data on the hard drive, putting all the programs that are supposed together next to each other, or all contiguous bytes or compute things that are the same next to each other, making it faster and more efficient to draw that information from. Programs during the boot, your UEFI or BIOS cannot find the hard drive at all. You get a post error because maybe it's the hard drive that has the operating system on it. Gives you a display message, what have you. At this point, remove and reattach the drive cables. Make sure they're seated properly. Inspect the drive for damage, like where the cables go in. Make sure you don't have bent pins. Unfortunately, it happens. Sometimes you have broken pins. Determine if a magnetic hard drive is spinning by listening to it. You can hear it whir up, like when the buzz come from your computer as you're booting up. You can also hear the magnetic or the rewrite head moving around, so you can hear it accessing the hard drive. The cables that you're using, check for fray or damage. It happens. Sometimes people don't do good cable management, and when they close the case or they clip things in, the cables get pinched and it damages the cables and they don't work as good. And then after that, go to your UEFI BIOS, check and see if there's any errors in the configuration. Try booting to other media, seeing if it's your system and not your drive. Other fun things can happen if you hear a loud grinding noise from your hard drive. I just want to offer my condolences at that point, because usually that means something has gone very, very wrong. But there's other things we'll talk about when we get to the troubleshooting section with regards to different problems you can experience with hard drives and how to go about solving them. Now, after that long, entertaining, and fun technical session, we should now be able to describe the purpose, types, and characteristics of storage devices. We should be able to compare and contrast different connection types like our SATA, PATA, IDE, Molex, eSATA, SCSI, USB, all that fun stuff. Explain the purposes and types of RAID. They love asking RAID questions, so please make sure that is in your study rotation, knowing the differences between 0, 1, 5, and 10. We will talk about it again. I will put another fun video in Slack for all of you to watch that kind of sums it all up really, really nicely with a bow on top, and make it make more sense. Describe the process for installing a storage device, etc., etc. Any questions so far?